Yeah, my name's Tony Osborne. My first colour correction experience was at the BBC in 1987. I was a senior recording operator there, and one of the duties was to actually do telecine transfers. So I had to operate an old rank Syntel Mark III telecine and transfer the pictures to video, which in those days was 1 inch. That was the main production format. But of course, the technology was quite limited, and it was much more of a technical job than a creative one. But nevertheless, that was the first colour correction experience. Since then, I've been doing colour work continuously, but generally as part of the online process, because my background is as an online video editor. It was about 10 to 12 years ago that we specialised in doing colour correction. So really, as a proper colourist on software, colour grading systems, probably I would say 12 years experience. The first colour correction systems were designed for colour grading film and then transferring the film usually to a format for editing purposes, which was usually video. Certainly in the world of TV production, that's what was happening. And I believe the first colour correction systems were devised in the 1980s. And by the late 80s, by the time I started working with them, the systems had got to the point where they could actually detect scene changes. So every time you ran your film over a join, it would detect it, make a buzzing noise, and you could store a new colour corrector setting. Then when you rewound your film to the beginning of the spool, it would recall the settings sequentially. What happened then, later on in the early 90s, that technology was then adapted so you could do tape-to-tape colour correction. And this is where the systems back then were the Pandora Pogel and the Da Vinci systems. That's when they came into their own, really. We had a system here that could do tape-to-tape grading for HD in 2000. Again, it was developed from that world of telecine colour grading, so it had quite limited functions. So, for example, it didn't have any means to isolate areas of the picture. So you were dealing with what's called primary colour grading, where you make a correction and it applies to the whole picture. For example, you had a basic set of primary colour controls which you could use to colour balance the picture, typically in three bands of luminance. So for example, your shadows, your midtones and highlights you could adjust independently. Some of those systems, if they were powerful, would enable you to isolate an area using a shape, usually a simple shape like a box or a circle. So for example, you could put a grad in the sky, you could get yourself a nice colourful blue sky, for example. And then as the technology improved, more and more options became available. So eventually those hardware systems actually became very sophisticated, and you could do secondary colour corrections as well, which meant you could take, for example, a flesh tone of an actor or a presenter and desaturate that selectively, so you could keep them a nice normal looking colour while you could then add saturation to everything else. So it was a very powerful system. It took a while to be adopted in everyday TV production, though, because largely because of budget and time. But by the late 90s, some of the non-linear systems had basic colour correctors that were actually getting pretty good, included in the package. So finally, by probably 2000, most TV programs in this country actually were colour graded properly. So the quality of, I think if you were to look back, you'd see the quality of the visual images being created took a really big step up from, say, the mid-90s through to the mid-2000s, and especially then as well with the advent of HD TV as well. The next big step was software. The problem, of course, was colour correction should be a sort of instant and fluid process, and you just cannot afford to wait for long render times. So we had to wait for computers to get sufficiently fast. But by the early to mid-2000s, they were getting there. So there were several new systems released to the market all about the same time by companies like Autodesk, Filmlight, Digital Vision, Quantel. They all had their software solutions. And what that meant, in most cases, was pretty much unlimited capability. And they would also combine some features which previously you would have had to go to a compositing system for. For example, you can do tracking, you can isolate by using keyers, and you could do very sophisticated, complex, and very detailed colour corrections. So I think the big difference between the older hardware systems and the newer software systems were the hardware systems were good because they're very quick no rendering, and they're very good for doing a broad brush approach, but they weren't so good at going in detail and doing very fine, very subtle corrections. And you can see that as well in the feature film world, because these same systems are used for TV and the feature film world. And you'll see from the early 2000s onwards, much more creative and adventurous looks in feature films. There's quite a few standout examples which people come back to time and time again. There was a film called Traffic, for example, in the mid-2000s that was a bit of a benchmark for colour grading, and also certain directors like to work in certain colour palettes. So what's happened now then, of course, because you're now using the same systems and the same technology for the feature films and TV, is your TV production team can have that aspiration for their programme. And they may well come in and say, oh, I saw a great film last week and I've got a scene in this documentary about wildebeest crossing a river where half of them get eaten by lions. Actually, can we make that look like, for example, Saving Private Ryan? Mm-hmm. So, and this happens and has happened for some time, and that's down largely to the improvements in the technology. Well, there are techniques which any colourist will find themselves using quite often, because we have to always be very conscious of things like flesh tones of any people that are in the production. We always like nice blue skies. We don't like highly saturated green grass. I mean, there's a few kind of things that sort of come up over and over again. So, of course, there are techniques available on all the systems to enable you to deal with those things. I tend to use blending modes quite a lot, and curves as well, because I think they give you a lot of extra control and some more interesting looks. And also what I do tend to use a lot of is the matte drawing functions with the blur function as well, because that can create some interesting tilt shift type looks and make sometimes an otherwise quite dull picture look a lot more interesting. The same matte drawing tool, of course, can be used for creating vignettes and interesting shapes just to enhance the form of a picture. So those are the sorts of techniques that I'll use. I mean, of course, you need to know both. If you don't know your colour theory, it's unlikely, even with the best software in the world, that you're going to produce good-looking pictures. I mean, you may do, but that will probably be a happy accident. I mean, on the other hand, of course, it's no good knowing loads of colour theory and not being completely happy with the software, because you will simply not be productive. Productivity is a big thing, actually, and these colour grading systems all have sort of colour grade management and recall functions to enable you to quickly reapply grades you've already done and trim them and so on, just to enable you to get through a production in what is actually an ever-decreasing time span. So basically, what you need to know your colour theory, and you need to know your software, and what you'll find is the software will have, well-designed software will always have tools to enable you to fix the common problems or to achieve a lot of creative looks as well. You could think of colour grading as a two-stage process. Sometimes you may have to fix deficiencies in the original source material. Underexposure, overexposure, colour casts, mixed lighting. These things have always happened and always will happen. Of course, digital cameras are getting better and better, so things are not quite as they used to be. Things have improved a lot. Once those issues are out of the way, then of course the creative part can begin. In terms of creativity, it's not about making one shot look fantastic. What it's about is creating a look for the entire sequence and for the entire show, and having the speed and the skill and the eye to actually get something that's coherent and matches shot to shot. And that is the real skill, is speed and consistency. It's no good being able to produce a stunning looking image that takes you half an hour if you can't then replicate that in a fraction of the time on lots of other material. My wife's background is in the history of art, so she's a good person to talk to. If I ever go to London, I'll try and go to the Tate Modern or the V&A. Watch a lot of films, not always good ones, but just ones that might have something interesting about the look. A lot of Netflix drama, of course, because the TV dramas, the production values are now rivaling the feature films, in my opinion. Trying to keep up to date with what's out there. And of course, what you find is you do see techniques coming back over and over again. So you could argue there's nothing new under the sun, but perhaps the real skill is knowing the right look for your particular production. I also, probably more than art, films, TV or music, I tend to go for walks and look at the natural world. I mean, it's quite important if you're in a room like this with no reference to anything real that you do look at a real sky occasionally and some real sea and some real grass. And you see the most amazing combinations of colours in nature, and that can be quite inspiring. And actually, sometimes unexpected. There's often new things to be seen there. No, I don't think it's important to innovate on every single project. I think it's important to be creative, and if you try and offer new ideas to directors and production teams, it's quite probably the most common thing that I think will happen is you'll see something in a film or on your Sunday walk that you like the look of, and you'll wonder how you can accommodate something similar into your next production, and you might find a way of doing that and offer that to the client. I think more importantly than innovating on every production, though, is to actually know what's right for the production, and also not trying to push and pull the material beyond its comfort zone. Digital cinematography's come of age now, and the pictures that we're getting back from the Arris, the Sony cameras, the Red cameras, are stunning compared with what was available 10 years ago on a video camera. But even so, there's still a limit to what you can do. And the software is so powerful, it's just as easy to make a picture look really horrible as it is to make it look really good. So it's a question of having taste, sensitivity, and a good eye as well. And then having some good ideas and discussing it with selling the idea to the production team and getting them to buy into it. And making them feel that maybe they had that idea themselves, but actually it was you. Probably historically there has been a bit of a divide between drama productions in terms of the people that work on them and the type of camera work and so on, and documentaries. But actually I now see that it's kind of coming together. Even though there isn't much overlap in terms of directors and producers, I don't often see drama directors moving to natural history. It may happen, but not very often. I think what is happening is that the natural history documentaries, especially the feature films, for example, the Disney nature feature films is a good example, they tend to think of their characters as a cast in a drama. And they'll tend to try and give each character a kind of little colour palette of his or her own. And they'll also sometimes use colour grading to signpost story points, like, oh, here's the bad guy, and we're going to do a certain colour for that. And here's the good guy, so we're going to warm that up a bit, and so on. So I think actually the same techniques are being applied to both genres now, more and more often. With the drama, it's very good to have a good working relationship with the DP, because they if they can, they normally want to be in the grade. The same thing will apply, of course, to the director and producer. With documentaries, the reality is you're very unlikely to see the person that shot it, because by the time it gets through to post-production, they're off doing something else. Sometimes you don't see anybody from the production team. If it's a long-running series and you've been doing it for a long time, you're kind of left just to do it. If it's a new production, I always want to either see the client or even just speak to them by phone and get a brief and make sure we're sort of talking the same language, and that when they come to watch it at the end of the day, there's going to be no nasty surprises. So that is important. Of course, if you watch a lot of TV and you might even have watched something they'd worked on before, there's lots of ways to get a feel for what they actually want without them having to be there sitting behind you for 10 or 12 hours. So I do find the grades that are attended tend to be the drama grades, and less so with the documentaries. Here we work in Rec 709 for TV grading using the Dolby monitors. We also have a DI suite with a barcode projector, and if we're grading for theatrical release, we'll use the P3 colour space. All our systems are capable of working in ACES, but as yet we haven't had a project which has needed that. In terms of codecs, I think you're talking acquisition camera codecs rather than delivery codecs. I have thought for a long time the most successful codec, I think, is the Apple ProRes that the ARRI camera range is using. You know, that you can do a lot with the pictures with that codec, which is ProRes 444, and the pictures don't fall to bits. You don't see banding. You don't introduce a lot of noise. It seems a very robust, resilient codec. So that would be my choice. I prefer that to the Sony XAVC, for example. But I've now heard that actually we're going to be able to record ProRes on the Sony and the Red camera range as well. So I think that says something really for the ProRes format. Well, the standard advice until a few years ago was always get yourself a copy of Adobe Photoshop and learn the color tools in that. Of course, now the advice is to download the free version of Blackmagic, you know, Resolve, and learn that. Apart from the software, the advice I would say is don't start trying to make your pictures look really wacky and extreme. I would get a set of brushes, even if you have to download some material from somewhere or shoot your own stuff on a camcorder or your phone even. Use Resolve and try and make the pictures look natural. Try and make everything match. Just try and, maybe you could go for a slightly exaggerated version of natural, but just try and get pictures that look natural with a nice balanced color palette and natural colors for everything in the frame, and then try and match that to every other shot. And do that with lots and lots of different sets of rushes if you can, if you've got access to the footage. Daytime material, nighttime material, interior, exterior, transitions in to out. Just, it's important to get a feel for how cameras respond to different light, different times of day. And before you start getting ambitious and going through all the color tools these systems have, it's really important to be able to do a good primary grade, because sometimes that is all the picture needs. So in other words, don't start using the tracker, don't start using the keyer, don't start drawing mats. If you can't get the picture fundamentally looking correct and looking good, there's no point using the more advanced tools. You have to start with that. Once you've mastered that and you're pretty good at it and you can do it quite quickly and easily, then start trying to do some different styles. There's quite a lot of styles out there that you could mimic. Things come around in fashion a lot. So, for example, a lot of them hark back to the days of film processing. So there's the old perennial favourites like bleach bypass, cross process, all these things. There's the Hollywood orange and teal colour scheme where you'll see they push flesh tones towards orange and shadow areas to a kind of blue hue, which is teal. And you can have a look at some films that have been done like that and try and copy that. But as I say, the first thing is really a good basic primary colour grade with natural colours, because that's the first thing you'll ever be asked to do, is to do that.